So one of the bonuses that our 30-year anniversary has brought us is an augmentation boost rate. And with players augmenting their gear, newer players may want to look into this process as well. Hey, my name is Chrono. I primarily cover PSO2 content, and today we're going to be going over how to get started with gearing over an NGS. Let's go ahead and jump into this. So the gearing process isn't too complicated. However, for newer players, I can see how it would be a bit daunting with the pretty high cost of upgrading and weapon unlocking your potential and limit breaking your weapons to get them up to level 80 and all the different augments we have access to. If you don't really know what you're doing or you're not keen on looking up information, you can get a bit confused or lost in the sauce, so to speak. But I'm here to tell you that it's actually way simpler than most people make it out to be when they're first learning the process. So a few things to go over before we jump directly into the augmenting process is just kind of how you should get set up with setting up your gear overall. If you're just still going through the new leveling process, let's say, for example, you're still going through the story. As you go through the story, you're going to be handed gear that you can use while you're going through. You really don't need to worry about purchasing anything. There are a few moments where you may run into issues with battle power. Now, I've been told, I haven't gone through it personally yet. I plan to in the future, but I haven't gone through it personally yet. I've been told that the battle power gates have been removed completely. And though some people have said, yeah, they've been removed, I've also seen people complain that they've gotten stuck in the story because of battle power. So until I actually go through it myself, again, I'm not going to say one way or another. I will say the last time I did go through this process, because I did do it for a free-to-play character series, we didn't get battle power gated at all, except for, I think, one portion of the entire story near the end of the Redum series, and it required maybe 3 or 4 levels to get, and then we were good to go again. Just a note, in the where are we right now, the Alio series, you'll get a set of gear near the end of the Redum portion. You get a set of gear at level 65. You'll be handed a set of gear directly into your inventory, and we're going to talk about that. And if you're playing during this current event, so basically when this video goes live, if you happen to have the seasonal points, you may not, because the seasonal enemies are all the way in the Steer region, which you may not be able to access by that point. But if you happen to have the seasonal points to go ahead and get a hold of it, I'm not sure how you would, but if you do, you can go ahead and pick up a seasonal weapon, and this is basically going to be your best bet no matter what during the season if you're brand new. It's already limit broken all the way up. It's already level 80. You don't have to worry about augmenting because it's already augmented. It's augmented very well, actually. This is a little bit of a cheat sheet or a little bit of a head start of what we're going to be talking about, but it's augmented perfectly fine for a new player to go ahead and just jump right into, with the exception of, like, I would say just Slayer for the most part. And that's about it. And we're going to talk about all the things you need to know about when it comes to setting up your weapon. So let's say, for example, we are fresh level 85. We've gotten all the way through the leveling process. We're using, let's say, our Argenti weapon, or we're using the Aeoni weapon from the event, and we've got our first weapon to build up, and we want to go ahead and get started on doing this. So what do we prioritize? Where do we start? The first thing you want to do when it comes to setting up your weapon is you do want to limit break it. Limit breaking your weapon increases the enhancement level, the maximum enhancement level. For certain weapons, it starts out at 50, going up 60, 70, 80, 80 being the max. You want to get this all the way up to 80. Can be a little bit expensive, don't get me wrong, but when it comes down to it, it's not super difficult to earn the money that you need. It may not be the piece of content you want to do at the time. However, realistically speaking, even in the worst case scenario, so let's say completely free to play, no access to extra resource or anything along those lines, you can earn that money in roughly 3 to 4 hours if absolutely necessary. And that's being super generous with how much time it would take. Realistically speaking, with all the bonuses you get and everything that's going on, you can get it much quicker than that. We can talk about that in another video as well. Basically, for anyone who wants to know, it's dex-based farming. Doesn't really require super high amounts of optimization. Higher amounts of optimization is going to make you more money over time, but we have farmed this in the lowest amount of optimization, just kind of YOLO with randoms, both with premium and non-premium players, and made a large amount of money very, very, very easily. So don't worry too much about that. It's definitely easy to go ahead and get it taken care of. It just may not be the content that you specifically want to do at that given time. Now, as far as what to prioritize, what we talked about is limit breaking your weapon, get that up to 80, level it up, leveling up your weapon is much simpler nowadays than it used to be. As long as your weapon is limit broken, when you're looking at what you should use to, let's say, feed your weapon to level it up, there are these capsules now. So if we click over here, these Endemio capsules. These capsules are made, well, sometimes they drop, but these capsules you also get primarily from, excuse me, you get primarily from trading in Gold Prim 2 or Gold Prim 2 swords and armor, and you get these capsules themselves. Now the Gold Prim 2 sword technically is going to be worth more experience than just this capsule. So if you want to like highly optimize this process, you would essentially just be going through and using the swords, but it gives you like an extra 900 experience in the 100,000 that you're going to be getting. So it's not really that big of a deal in the grand scheme of things. But it is worth mentioning that technically it is a bit more experience because it also counts the weapon as well. We can talk about that optimization in a different video, but in case you guys are curious, I go over the entire cost of upgrading a weapon and all of the bonuses and everything like that in another video on the channel. I'll make sure to try to remember to link that in the video description, but in case I do miss it, it'll be in the pinned comment. So just going over as far as upgrading goes, really when it comes to upgrading, you don't need to go into too much optimization or anything along those lines. Just use your Endemios. Some people are doing things like grabbing, let's see if we're going over here, scroll on down and grabbing and upgrading Gold Prim swords. This is a great way of doing things beforehand when we didn't have access to those Endemio capsules. This was basically just to kind of save on storage space, but realistically speaking, it's not a massive difference one way or another. You can go ahead and use those and use bonuses like right now where we have 90% great enhancement. I want to say it's what it's called. These are the bonuses you never really pay attention to, right? Yeah, great success rate. We have 90% great success rate, which just basically doubles the amount of experience you get from everything. So instead of it taking 10 capsules to get something up a level at a low level, usually from like 60 to 61 and so on and so forth, it takes like 10 capsules. Instead of it taking those 10 capsules, it'll only take you to 5 because you get double bonus. So super cool, super nice, very easy to upgrade, no big deal there. So got your weapon to plus 80. What else are we concerned about? Well, we also want to upgrade or unlock its potential. Potentials are a massive amount of your damage. So you want to make sure that you are unlocking your potential all the way to level 6. 6 is the maximum for your weapons. It's not super hard to do nowadays. I'll be perfectly honest, I have so much of the resource, I haven't even thought about having to farm it. It just drops from every piece of content you guys would normally do. Things like Lucille, urgent quests, like the one that's currently going on right now that I'm missing. But things like Lucille, the limited time quests. So you can see if we pop over here, like this just shows this stuff here, but there's a bunch of like trash loot that drops in here as well that you end up getting all those items mixed in as well. So, I mean, just doing Lucille, limited time quests, urgent quests, you're going to stack up tons and tons of those resources. Getting your mission pass done has a bunch of resources in it as well that you're going to need if you still happen to need more. I believe the event, if there's currently an event going on, usually the event shops tend to be mostly the same. And this just tells you how much I don't pay attention to some of these things here because you really just don't need them anymore after a while. You can see you get a lot of resources kind of mixed in here: arms refiners, photon chunks, scales, things of that sort. You just get tons of them. If you're someone who likes, let's say, for example, you don't have very many X cubes, you're going to start to stack up X cubes like crazy as long as you're playing one class. After leveling classes, I mean, outside of leveling the one class you're going to play, there's not really a benefit to leveling everything else unless you just like to go for completionism. And even then, you can just toss it on as a subclass and let it level that way. You don't need to have subclasses max level. It doesn't actually do anything because they don't really attribute to your actual level or to your skill points. So it's totally fine, but you're gonna get tons of those resources just by leveling up and over leveling when it comes to X cubes. You can also pick up some extra resources from the GP exchange. This is points every week, so don't forget to come over here and pick up the resources you may need. There's more arms refiners, there's more photon chunks, and some of the capsules we're gonna talk about are also here. So definitely worth keeping an eye out on if you're someone who is early on and you still need more resources. So afterwards, we have our weapon maxed out at 80. We have our potential unlocked at 6. What else are we looking at? We're gonna make a slight detour and talk about armor as well, units, because it's a little bit different for units. I recommend as a new player with units, you do want to go ahead and unlock to 80 eventually, but at least unlocking to 70 and then getting your unit to 61 is the minimum in my opinion, because this does give you 6 augmentation slots. Now, your units don't really apply to your damage whatsoever. Other than the augments that are on them, the actual unit itself doesn't really give you any damage outside of the extra HP, PP, and its base stat value that it gives you. And this stat value doesn't change based on your upgrade. So as long as you have this weapon or this unit at least at 61, you're going to get 6 augmentation slots, and that's the majority of where your damage is going to come from, is those augmentation slots. So when it comes to weapon, plus 80 max potential at level 6. Comes to unit, you can leave it at 61. That way you have your 6 augmentation slots, and come back to this as the last thing you do when it comes to like really gearing yourself up and optimizing your gear. You're already missing out on some battle power. That's perfectly fine. Don't really stress it too much. Honestly, if you're gearing up correctly, you're going to have enough battle power to do everything you need to do. And if you really need to eke out a little bit of extra battle power to get into something, yeah, you can go ahead and level up your units, so on and so forth. But we're talking about like optimal, or not optimal, but I guess, yes, optimal is the word here that we can use in this situation. But you're talking about getting the gains in the order that really matter the most. So you've got your unit at 61, you have your weapon at 80, you have your potential unlocked and everything along those lines. What's the next thing to do? One thing I will mention, because some players always ask this because they do kind of portions of things. Even if you have your weapon unlocked to 80 and leveled up, and you have your potential unlocked, but you haven't augmented your weapon, don't switch to it yet. I know it's going to be kind of challenging not to want to jump over to it or anything along those lines, but a weapon with no augments is very silly to have. It's basically free getting this damage in here. And if you don't have the resources you need to go ahead and fill this out already, don't worry about jumping to it immediately. You will get these resources very quickly. I mean, this is, of course, an example of my weapon currently, not what you're going to be going for today, but you will get these resources very quickly. Again, they hand these to you super, super easily, and this is just going to be the start of what you're going to do. And spoiler alert, this is actually perfectly fine for most players in most content. You won't have to push yourself up to what I'm running right now, because a lot of people don't do that level of content when it comes down to it. And it's totally fine. It's not a huge deal. Like, I'm not telling you guys, hey, look, you need to augment your armor like this. This is several millions of Meseta, so I wouldn't really tell you have to go that far. So now that we're all set with that, what are we augmenting, right? What does it come down to? How are we going to augment our gear? So there's one other thing to consider when you're looking at augmenting, and it's something you actually want to consider on your weapons. It's Fixa. So your Fixa is another kind of like a specialized augment that is mixed in. It's on weapons and units. It's different on units than it is on weapons. But you're really only concerned as a new player with one of 3 choices. And those 3 choices are going to depend on how far you are into your new player experience and how quickly you feel like you're going to be progressing through what you're doing. As you can see with our Argenti weapon, I'm going to show you really quick. This just pops into your inventory when you hit level 65. Argenti has got a Fixa attack level 5, which gives us 9% potency, which you'd think is pretty awesome, right? Well, this is great for someone who's brand new and who hasn't interacted with the add-on skill system at all. The add-on skill system is it's a beast for its own video, but a short version is it's extra stats and extra damage that you can get just by leveling up or unlocking some extra stats on those classes specifically. It's not leveling up the class that gives it to you. It's kind of part of it. It's a bit more difficult to explain fully, but essentially it's getting extra bonuses from other classes that affect your character overall. And some of those bonuses actually make you want to go for different Fixa values depending upon what class you're playing. So I'm gonna give you kind of the rundown of what Fixa value or what Fixa you're looking for on your individual weapon depending upon the class, and you can kind of go from there. So first and foremost, if you're new and you have nothing in add-on skills, you don't even know what I'm talking about. I mentioned add-on skills, Fixa attack is going to be usually your best friend. It's just raw damage, easy across the board, and it usually has some of the most value for everyone. If you happen to have some of your add-on skills posted in already and you actually have worked in add-on skills, it's normally going to be Fixa. Fatale is your best friend. Fatale is going to increase your crit chance, and it's going to give you the highest level of damage increase. At the moment, we do not have enough crit chance on most of the classes in the game that you don't want to just get more crit chance. You're already getting some crit chance from add-on skills, so getting Fatale is going to add on more crit chance, which is going to push you into a better bracket to get more damage out. There are exceptions. The 2 major exceptions are going to be Force, which is going to want to use Fixa Wix. Wix makes it so you do increased damage as long as you're attacking the weak spot of an enemy. and with force techniques, you are always hitting the weak point. They basically count using the proper element as hitting the weak point. So you basically just want to go with Wix. It's the play for force primarily. Also, I believe Ranger is in that same category, as they use Blight Bullet. I always mix this with Weak Bullet because it's called, the translation, the JP version is called Weak Bullet, but Blight Bullet. If you happen to be a Ranger, using Blight Bullet creates a weak spot, so Fixa Wix is definitely the play there. You can use Fatale, it's not like the end of the world if you happen to get Fatale, but Fixa Wix works for you guys in those certain circumstances. And if you happen to be a Slayer, Slayer's in a bit of a weird spot, but I'm going to say for Slayer, just go with Termina. The reason I say it's in a bit of a weird spot, because if you're a new Slayer, you don't have the extra crit chance to make it kind of worth, and in that situation, you may want to go Fatale, depending upon the weapon you're using and how much you actually have of it and how well you are at playing Slayer. But it's more of a little level overcomplication that's unnecessary. Just go with Termina. Termina doesn't give you crit damage, and you get a lot of crit chance out of playing Slayer, so it's definitely worth the play there. That's pretty much it when it comes down to fixes. So one more time really quickly here is, mostly if you're new, you have none add-on skills, just go attack. If you're a Slayer, go Termina. If you're a Force or a Ranger, go Wix. And if you're everyone else, go Fatale. Pretty much the play for right now. It may change in the future if we get access to more crit chance, or we have a weapon that has crit chance built into its potential. That's something to keep in mind. If you're using a weapon that has crit chance built into its potential, 10 to 20%, if you happen to have add-on skills, is usually enough to want to go over to Termina, and that's really the only exception in that situation. All right, so we've gotten through all of that. That's a lot to go over, apologies, before we can get to actual augmenting. And this is why I say people usually get really overwhelmed with augmenting. These are all different capsules that you can augment with. And I can tell you right now, 99% of these are useless to you to augment. They're not useless, but they're useless to go ahead and augment, because most of these are trash or junk augments. And then the some mixed in here that are actually useful are combined into more powerful augments that you actually want to go for. So in the terms of actually augmenting your gear, you really don't need to worry about most of those things. So what makes an augment good? Why would I want to augment one thing versus another? And how do I tell what augments are useful for me? So when it comes to augmenting, you're primarily looking to augment for damage. I know there's some people out there that want to play different roles when it comes to PSO2. Let's say, for example, you want to be a tank, or you want to be more supporty. Everyone's augmenting damage. It's the subset of those augments or the gear that you pick primarily, or the class you're playing, that kind of helps you out with being a bit more tanky or being a bit more supporty. It's not in your augments. When it comes to your augments, you're just going damage, and then maybe the secondary effects of your augments are what you're going to look at when you decide whether or not you're going to be going for something versus something else. And we'll talk about that. So the 5 basic types of augments you're going to be looking at are going to be, and these are the ones that affect your damage properly, are going to be potency augments, just raw potency floor augments, and then the 3 different damage types: melee, range, and tech. Melee, range, and tech are pretty easy to tell because they are color coded. Melee being orange, range being blue, and tech being yellow. These were much more important beforehand, but a lot of our augments have shifted to just potency, not, the individual potency types. But it's still worth mentioning because you can still fit some of these augments in to fill in some slots if you're playing a specific way. Now, looking at the augments, these are actually the only augments you really need to consider at all in the game right now. I know it's a little bit of a hefty list. I don't think it's too bad. And a lot of these augments do share the same slots, and we're going to talk about that as well. But these are really the augments you need to consider here. Now, if you're someone who's like, man, I need to know just what is the important stuff for me to use, I'm going to give you a quick rundown of what those augments are, and then we'll talk about them a little bit more in detail. So we've got a level 61 armor here. We can go ahead and just use, can I get all this on here? I can't, unfortunately. That's such a bummer. I wish they would let me. It'd be really nice. So the augments that you pretty much can almost always augment, no matter what the situation is going to be Gladiusol, Gigas Maste, Half Finale, and Grand Dread Keeper LC, as long as you're not a Slayer. If you're a Slayer, I would drop Grand Dread Keeper LC personally. So these 4 are pretty much always going to be the case. They're LC augments. Basically what they are they're versions of augments that drop more readily available. They're easier to augment, and they are almost always guaranteed when you're going for at least 9 of them, since it's a 10% success rate, meaning if you use 10 of them, it's 100%. So what you've got here essentially is kind of like the closer to the meta augments. Like the meta augments are usually the Gladius Soul, the Gigas Mask, the Half Finale, Grand Dread Keeper. Those a bit more expensive. These are a lighter version of those. They're basically the same thing as the normal augment, but minus 0.25% potency, which doesn't sound like a ton, but when it adds up, it actually is quite a bit because yeah, multiplicative damage bonuses. It's a great introductory into gearing yourself up. And if you're like, hey, you know, what should I use? This is kind of something you can always start with as a framework. If you're playing a Slayer, again, I would advise not going heavily into, or I wouldn't, you know, really pay attention to Grand Dread Keeper. If you're playing Slayer, you're really trying to push just raw potency overall. Technically, if you're also using, you're also someone who doesn't have a lot of crit chance, you want to actually favor more potency floor, but I don't want to get too complicated in these augments. I want it to be kind of simple for newer players. So if you're new and you're not a Slayer, you're pretty much safe with these 4 augments every single time. Honestly, you're kind of safe with, where is it? It's these 5 augments in most situations. It is a bit of a toss-up depending upon who you ask versus, like, you know, their specific setups. Some, you know, favor more potency overall because they just happen to get luckier with crits. I'm just talking about calculations, what's actually worth versus not. You can pretty much almost always get away with using all 5 of these without really too much of a difference overall. Crits are of course going to affect that, and then of course your overall luck is going to affect that, but this is pretty safe in most situations, and we'll talk about why some of these may not be the ones you want to use. If you're like, I want to know what I use all the time no matter what, and I'm just starting out, these 3, literally every case scenario, you're perfectly fine. There's no question. Gladia LC, Gigas Mask LC, Half Finale LC, all solid every time you're going to have this on your build setup. You're good to go here. So let's talk about where some of these things kind of differ and where some of these kind of share the same stuff, right? So the whole concept of potency floor, and if you're concerned like what the heck is potency floor, what does that mean? Damage in PSO2 works in the form of variances. So you have you basically hit an enemy, and then based on what your variance is, you have a chance to hit between a certain amount of damage versus another amount of damage. So I'm going to use values that are really just easy to understand. We're just going to use, let's say 7 and 10, right? So let's say you have you hit an enemy and your damage variance is between 7 and 10. So you hit an enemy, you're hitting either 7, 8, 9, or 10. It just kind of rolls damage, and you have to, it's luck, it's RNG, right? Maybe you hit 10, maybe hit 7, whatever happens to be. What potency floor does is potency floor affects that 7, that low end of your potency. That's your potency floor, and it raises your potency floor. So let's say you get enough potency floor and it brings that 7 up to an 8. Well, now your damage range is between 8 and 10. You're not going to roll 7 anymore because your damage range has been brought up. It doesn't actually increase your maximum damage, but it does increase your average damage. Now, why does that not matter when you have things like crit involved? Well, what crit does is it bypasses the potency floor process, and it makes it so you always hit your maximum of your variance, meaning you always hit that 10. And then of course it stacks on its other damage bonuses on top of that, you know, your crit damage. With crits, I believe it has like its raw 20% modifier plus another modifier on top of that when it comes to add-on skills, so on and so forth, and then Fixa and all that craziness. But when it comes down to when it affects potency floor, crit makes it so you bypass that potency floor and you're always hitting that 10. If you happen to be a very lucky person or whatever it happens to be, you can, you know, opt to go more into potency, right? But the rule mostly is you don't want to sacrifice too much potency for potency floor, but you don't want to ignore potency floor unless you are a Slayer. That's just pretty much it. When it boils down to it, you don't want to ignore potency floor unless you're a Slayer. So when we're looking at what we want to augment, let's say, for example, we're not playing Slayer, something like the Dominas. So the Dominas share a slot, meaning that if I were to use high Ale Domina, high Ret Domina, and high Kavar Domina, and let's say we go into this, you can see they all share a category, meaning I can't augment all 3 of them. Got to pick one of them. Usually augments that have a similar name will share a category, so it makes it pretty easy to tell. In this situation, what we're looking at, I believe they actually are working on the wiki to show the categories a bit easier for you guys. And I'm going to explain the categories that we have here that we're working on, but it's worth mentioning that if you are trying to augment something and then you go into the categories, see them all in the same category, it means you can't have all of the same of that specific type of augment. You can only have one from each category. Right now, the ones we consider are going to be the trials and the dominas, and that's it. Other than that, you don't have to worry about deciding between any of that stuff. So when we're looking at augmenting, what should we go for next? Well, I normally gravitate towards picking up one of the dominas. Now, the domina I usually go for is either going to be high ret domina, because it's got 2.25% potency floor, 2.75%, and it's got some HP. High ale is nice because it has a split between HP and PP, but as you can see, you lose some potency floor. If it is an option, high Kavar domina will always be the play when it comes to the LC choice. Definitely want to go here. I know I'm not saying LC. Apologies, I'm so used to saying the regular names, but assume LC, you're looking at it here. If you're looking at the regular version of this, it's 0.25% higher, meaning it's 3% potency, meaning it's going to be better, but it's more expensive. If we're looking at LCs right now, they're the cheaper variant version of them. And they drop all over the place, so don't worry too much about that. You will definitely get them. High Kavar domina is just the newest one. It drops the least. High red domina drops more often, and high ale domina drops the most. So technically, because of the difference in potency floor amounts, high Kavar domina is the best choice of all of them. Unless you're a Slayer, then you want none of them. And the reason why we are okay mostly with Grand Dreadkeeper LC is because it gives us a massive 5% potency floor. And even if you are a Slayer, there are times you are going to not crit. So it is still fairly useful. Even if you're playing Slayer, most people opt to not go with it, but the alternative choices may not be amazing. So some people do go ahead and say, you know what, Grand Dreadkeeper is totally okay to go with. It gives me some potency floor. You're also getting HP and PP, which are very nice. So you can go ahead and jump into that choice here. So let's say I'm augmenting a new weapon. What am I going to go with? Well, I'm going with these 4 staple, fairly straightforward, really easy, but I still have 2 more slots. Now, one thing that people tend to use are the augmentation capsules from the AC scratch when the support scratch comes around. It's not around right now, but when it does come around, I believe it's coming around in like a week or 2. When it does come around, the cheaper variant of each of those augmentation capsules of whatever the current one is, right now it's XD. I believe it's moving to something else. I can't remember the name of what it is. I'm sure someone will mention in the comments below. But those cheap versions of those capsules, like the Ward version or the Gua version, the ones that give you like defense or what's the other one? It's status effect defense or status effect resistance, things like that. Those aren't very popular choices. However, those are even better than the XD variants or the previous variants of the older ones. So if you can grab one, even if it's the cheapest version of it, it's good. As long as it's going to be for the stat that you're looking for. So like make sure that if you're playing a melee class, it covers melee, because they have dual stat versions and then they have a triple stat version. So make sure if you're playing a melee class, it covers melee. If you're playing range, it covers range. If you're playing tech, it covers tech. But at least pick one of those up if it's an option. If it's not, like if you're in the time frame like we're in right now, buying them off season is very, very expensive. I would not recommend it. I wouldn't say if you're new, I wouldn't recommend spending anywhere over $1 mil for one of these. If it's under $1 mil, golden, grab one, totally worth it. But if it's over $1 mil, just go ahead and skip it. We can put something else in the slot for now. You don't need to worry about it. It will come around. It will decrease in price. Just be patient. Now, in the meantime, what are we going to put in there? So we talked about these stats here. These are just raw percentage. Totally fine. Definitely can pick one of these if you want to go for it. I play melee. I'd put might on. We also have the option of trippable. Trippable is kind of like the mix of all 3. It is just raw potency. Instead of like specific weapon potency, it's just raw potency. So bam, that can go in there too. Totally works out perfectly fine at 3%. Either one of these works out okay. We also have the option of the trial. Trials are augments that give you a bit more damage. The trade-off is there is a negative stat involved with them. So we have Guaro, Wardrow, and Spiro. Spiro gives us -5 PP. Wardrow gives us -5 all down resistance, which is essentially our status effect. Yeah, status effect resistance. And then -5% damage resistance. That's pretty straightforward, pretty self-explanatory. So now we have to decide, what are we going to go with if we want to use any of these? This is where I mentioned that the secondary effects of capsules can be where you make the decision on like being a tank or being more supportive, right? If you say you want to be tanky, you should not be using either one of these at all. These do tend to stack up. I mean, you can kind of get away with the wardrobe because it's just status effects. Status effects can be pretty debilitating. You got freeze, you have the shock, and then you have what's the other one? Blind. And blind is pretty bad when it comes to damage because you're just straight up missing. Shock, you know, interrupts your attacks in the middle, like you will just like kind of, you know, basically spaz and your character won't move for a split second. And then freeze, of course, you're frozen in place. So I mean, you can deal with the other ones, the ones that like make you confused or anything along those lines. Those are, you know, you can kind of work with that, but these are things that you can be a very big pain. And keep in mind, this is per augment, right? So you have this on your weapon. If you have it on each of your units, that's 3 more units. These all stack up, just like the positives stack up, so do the negatives, and they do it multiplicatively. They're not additively. So be very, very careful when you're looking at going with these. Let's say you want to be tanky, you definitely should not be going Guaro at all. That's just going to give you minus damage resistance, which is bad. Or maybe you want to leverage that damage resistance. Maybe you play a tanky class and you're like, you know what, I can afford to do this. This is totally fine. I can, you know, go against this. That works out. Maybe you're playing force and you're like, I have really good PP economy. I can afford to go with -5 PP. Not a big deal. And some people opt to mix and match these. You can go Spear on a weapon, Guaro on one of your armor pieces, Wardrobe the other armor piece, maybe Spear on the other armor piece. Now you don't have as much. You only have like, you know, -50, -5, and then -10 PP. Or you're someone that, let's say you're playing a gunner and you're like, dude, PP is nothing for me. I'm always at full. I don't have to worry about it. Well, then you can go with Spear on all of them. And I know I mentioned earlier that, you know, these kind of share a category. That was a bit of a misstep. Apologies there. They do have a similar name, but they actually don't share a category. You can use all 3 of these. You don't have to worry about that at all. So if you want to use all 3, you can use all 3, right? And you don't have to worry about it. You can just, you're good to go. Let's say if you're playing Slayer, right? And you're like, I want to make sure I have max potency, but I want to be on the cheap end and I don't want to sacrifice any potency at all, right? There's some players that will literally do this. And there you go. That's their max potency. They have as much potency as they possibly can get. Everything's over 3.5. This is 3.75. That's 3.25, but there's another 3.5 that you can go with. And then 3.5. So they're golden. This is like cool. If I want to play Slayer and I don't care about my defenses and I don't care about dealing with status effects and I have plenty of PP, so I know I can manage it perfectly fine, there you go. That's totally something to help with. But maybe you don't like this. Maybe you don't want to deal with any negative effects at all. Well, that's why I have that might here, why I have the strippable here. And then you kind of have to go with something like Grand Keeper LC unless you're a Slayer. It's just really, really good with that potency floor. It's very, very useful, very helpful. Now you don't have any negative stats whatsoever. Maybe you're cool with 1. Honestly, Spear is not a bad one. It's -5 PP. It does kind of suck a little bit, but what you're going to find is that with all the bonuses that you get currently, the armors, the weapon, we also have our bonuses that we get from our alliances and things like that. You really tend to get a lot of extra stat that you can kind of leverage into these augmentations, and you're able to go ahead and go with this. So let's go ahead and just do a setup for Slayer and then non-Slayer of what I would recommend. And that's pretty much going to be it. So like always, Gladius Soul, Gigas Mass Lane, Half Finale, fantastic choices. I personally always go with the Grand Keeper LC. It's just way too much potency floor to ignore. And realistically speaking, you're just not going to always be lucky enough to crit all the time. Unless you have a potent or have a potential that has crit chance in it, it's just not going to be something that happens too often. Now, I personally go in with extra damage, so I take the Spear Trial. This is just something that I think is totally okay. You have so many extra bonuses you can get. You're going to be able to do massive amounts of damage, so you'll be perfectly fine. And then if you can manage the Kavar, go high Kavar Domina, get you a good amount of potency floor, get you a good amount of PP, kind of counteracts that Spear Trial, right, that you just used. So it's really, really nice. If not, you can go with something like Trippable. You get yourself your solid potency of 3%, no extra PP, but that's totally okay. Or you can drop maybe Trial and go with Trippable. That works too. Up to you at the end of the day. That one works perfectly fine. And for my Slayer fans out there, I mean, I personally like the idea of going with all the trials. But if you're like, yo, all the trials is kind of rough, drop Guaro and then go with Trippable. I think that's perfectly reasonable and that's totally okay. But at the end of the day, you can go with whatever combination you want to. Maybe you don't like trials at all. You'd rather go with some of the solid, you know, just stat stuff here. Go ahead and set yourself up that way. Just make sure you augment your weapons fully. every single slot. If you're someone who's trying to get a battle power, each augment equates towards your battle power. So you want to make sure that you are augmenting your entire set of gear, weapons, and units. And don't start using that stuff until it's ready. Don't swap over to the weapon until you've actually augmented it. Swap over to units until you've augmented them. I know it's going to be like really, you're ready to just jump over your Jones and they have a new weapon, Jones and have a new unit, maybe gets a bit more power, but it's going to look silly when you got a bunch of holes in your gear. Don't want you walking around looking like Swiss cheese. Terminology we used for Final Fantasy 14 back in the day, people who didn't put materia in their gear. It applies here too. You don't want to walk around with holes in your gear. Swiss cheese look ain't good. Anyway, guys, that's going to be it for me. That's pretty much everything you need to know when you're looking at gearing up, augmenting, setting your weapons up, everything like that. If you guys have any specific questions, feel free to join the Discord, DM me directly about the issue itself. It's totally fine. I'm more than happy to look into it with you guys. And if you happen to be a channel member or a Twitch subscriber, we can definitely do a sit down and go into more detail if you happen to have even more questions. Anyway, guys, thanks for watching all the way end. If you do have anything else that I might have missed, feel free to toss in the comments below. Everyone has their own way of doing things. I just wanted to do something that kind of equated to the most amount of people as possible. At the end of the day, gear up to your comfort level. Take advantage of all of the freebies. There are tons of them. And you'll do fantastic when it comes to playing PSO2. Anyway, take care, my friends. Peace out.